Hello everyone, my name is Fox. In this video we're going to be reviewing the Asus Vivobook S15. This is featuring the brand new Qualcomm ARM Snapdragon X Elite chip. So a lot of people are talking about this. This is a new Windows on ARM laptop that's available, and we're going to be going and putting it through the paces because there's a lot of things that are actually really great about this laptop. For all intents and purposes, I think this laptop is amazing. At the same time, I don't know how I could possibly recommend it when other laptops are just as good and the newer generation of laptops is just around the corner. So let's go jump into this review, starting out first with a look at the specs. There's only a few things that we need to care about here. The first and most important, obviously, is that Snapdragon X Elite chip. This chip is actually really good, especially because it's facing an uphill battle with running a lot of stuff through a translation layer using Microsoft Prism. So this is everything is x86 that you're running will be going through a translation layer to run on the ARM chip. So it is running at a disadvantage, and even though it's running at the disadvantage, it's not doing all that terrible. The CPU side is very good. We're getting somewhere close to what I would consider Zen 4 performance and power. The thing that is a big letdown on this is the GPU side, and we'll get more into that in the gaming benchmarks in this video a little bit later on. For the RAM, we have 16 gigabytes of the fastest LPDDR5X RAM that is available to us right now. Internally, it's labeled at 8,448 megahertz, which should be something like the 8533 megatransfers RAM that would be the highest ceiling for LPDDR5X. We also have 1 terabyte of PCIe Gen 4 storage. Along the sides, we have 2 USB 4, 2 USB 3.2 Type A Gen 1 slots, 1 HDMI 2.1, 1 3.5mm audio jack, and 1 microSD card slot. Regarding these ports on the side, there's a few things that I want to mention. When trying to run games off the microSD card, which I typically try to do just to speed up my benchmarking process, I noticed that there were tendencies for loading times to be exaggeratingly long. Running from the microSD card and even setting the performance policy on the microSD card to be better performance instead of fast removal, I was waiting up to 5 minutes just for them to load into the benchmark segment. Another thing worth pointing out is that I actually connected this USB-A Amazon Basics to Ethernet adapter to the USB-A port on the Snapdragon X Elite laptop, and it works no problem. So if you have random accessories, he also used the USB-C dock, which was a Ugreen U-dock, USB-C dock, so that worked just fine as well. So chances are any random USB accessory may work for you without much fanfare. So that was really cool to see that I didn't have to muck around. It just instantly worked. Something that I wanted to just kind of mention here. The next big thing that I want to talk about that is huge on this laptop is the display. This OLED panel is outrageously nice. It is a 3K 120Hz OLED panel, and Asus has been knocking it out of the park with regards to the quality of their OLED panels on their laptops. I am begging Asus, please have an OLED panel for the Asus ROG Ally 2. I would love that very, very much. But for this particular panel, the only thing you really need to know, outside of it being really gorgeous, is that it does consume a fair amount of power. When it's on at medium brightness, and depending on what is on the screen, it is an OLED panel, it is self-emissive. Depending on what is on the panel, if there's a bunch of white on the screen, you're going to be pushing out more power. So typically, you're going to be around 2 watts of power to power this OLED panel, depending on brightness and depending on whatever's on the screen. When you turn it off, obviously, if you're going to an external monitor, you'll be saving that 2 watts. So factor that into whatever you were thinking about in terms of total system power for running this device and actually using it and getting whatever battery life you anticipate out of it. The last thing we're going to talk about, obviously, is the battery. It's a 70 watt-hour battery. This is what's going to be giving us all of that battery life that a lot of you are going to be clamoring for. For what it's worth, I was not able to actually achieve in any general use case to get 18 hours of battery life. And we'll go over that more in just a second. First up, let's talk about my methodology of what I'm on and how I'm doing my tests. So just so you can see, again, I am on the latest BIOS that is available as of today, which is the 305 BIOS. Most reviews probably were done with the 302 BIOS. And for the Windows version, it is 24H2. The last bit that we need to talk about is there are 2 ways that you can configure power. One is via the Asus Armoury Crate, their Asus control panel. This I always set to max performance. But honestly, just setting that to max performance and then going over to the Windows control panel for power efficiency is where you're going to want to control power for this laptop. By default, it is at energy efficiency. So it's going to, by default, give you the best battery life it can possibly give at all times. And this is something that I would always recommend. I don't recommend this laptop as a gaming laptop, and that'll make more sense as we get into the gaming benchmarks later on. If you wanted to push this laptop and get the maximum performance when you're on battery, you're going to need to set this little setting here to best performance. This will allow you to juice the hell out of the battery, as evidenced by this Cinebench that is running with 63 watts of total system power, as you can see right here. This is what you're going to want to do if you want to get the same type of performance on battery that you get when you're plugged in. So just be mindful of that this is what you want if you need and demand max performance. Otherwise, you're going to be getting something less. We'll get into the CPU benchmarks in a moment just so you can kind of understand what that's going to look like from an energy efficient standpoint as well as a best performance standpoint and what that does for battery life. So with that out of the way, let's start talking about battery life and then move on to CPU benchmarks. Okay, so talking about battery life, there's a lot of ways that we can view this. Now, you can get excellent battery life out of this device, and by default, it's going to try to give that to you. If you're taking a look at this example, you should see that running the GeekBench benchmark with the energy efficiency mode enabled, that we're only using around 4.5 watts while this entire test is running. We are going to get a substantially lower score than if we set into best performance mode, but we are using very little clocks here, and the amount of power that the system is using is very little. In fact, what we're looking at here, this 4.5 watts, is with the display off. When we go and put the display on, you're going to be closer to around 6.5 watts. But again, that's going to be depending on whatever the brightness is and whatever you have on the screen. In my particular testing, that went down a little bit. It was down to like 6.2 watts, generally speaking, with my display on and general use. If we were to just disable the screen on this device and use it to an external monitor, you would get 15.5 hours of battery life, generally speaking, with the display off. However, when you have the display on, things get a little bit different, and I'll show you what that graph looks like just in a moment. We saw that 15.5 hours of battery life is pretty much the maximum battery life that you're going to get out of this device if you have it connected to an external display. On the flip side of the coin, we can really push power like we already showed you before with Cinebench by putting in best performance mode and really gunning all those CPUs as fast as possible. The heatsink on this laptop can easily dissipate that heat. However, the fan noise does get really loud when you're pushing all those cores to those max clocks. So be aware that putting on best performance mode is going to make the device loud. However, in energy efficiency mode, it is pretty much inaudible all the time. So this is kind of what a lot of people, I think, often want from an ARM-based device, is that they expect it to be light, power efficient, and quiet with excellent battery life. And for the most part, that's what you're going to get here. Which leads me right into this animated graph, what you're looking at right here. We can see the battery life depleting in real time as I'm using this device with medium brightness with varying stuff on the screen. And we're getting around 10.5 hours of battery life. And if you see, I started off my test and it starts off at 4.5 watts because it's going off to an external display. But then I go to the onboard display. We jump up to 6.1 to 6.3 watts of total system power that we're pulling out of the battery. This goes on for about 10.5 hours of battery life. So this is a realistic use case of the type of battery life that you should expect when just web browsing, going on YouTube, doing whatever, and not doing anything too stressful and keeping it parked into energy efficiency mode. This is a general use case. This changes greatly when trying to play games on this device, which again, I don't recommend, and we'll get into that in a second. But in a performance mode gaming segment, you should expect around 1.9 hours of battery life, depending on whatever the game is. So just keep that in mind, that you're generally going to be around 2 hours of battery life when you put it into performance mode for gaming. Likewise, in efficiency mode, if you go in efficiency mode, you're probably going to get around 3 to 3.5 hours of battery life in that scope. That's how big of a range can exist on this laptop, depending on what kind of demand you draw out of it. Likewise, if you really push it far and really push those CPUs to the max, you can get 1 hour of battery life if you're just constantly rendering for some strange reason. But you can do that if you really wanted to. So it can go down to having just 1 hour of battery life if you were just to run Cinebench nonstop at performance mode. You'll deplete the battery in about an hour. So that is the scope of how this looks like from the battery life. Let's go into how this looks like from a CPU perspective, trying to keep in mind what energy efficient mode is and what performance mode is, and trying to understand the difference between both of those. So what's interesting is from a GeekBench 6.3 perspective is that using single core and multi-core scores in efficiency mode will give us a single core score of 965 and a multi-core score of 8458. This is still reasonably good considering how little power the device is using overall, and the system is very usable when it's in this state. Going into performance mode, we're going to be looking at a single core score of 2417 and a multi-core score of 14375. This is a drastic increase in single core threaded performance, but you're going to pay for that in power. So just be mindful that what you're going to be doing here when you go into performance mode, that isn't free, and you're going to be going up to 12 watt of total system power kind of generally, and then you're going to be going from 10.5 hours of battery life down to about 5 hours of battery life. So that is basically the difference here when we're thinking about it from a battery life perspective. Generally speaking, if you're buying this laptop, I would wager that you want battery life, so just keep it in energy efficiency mode and just be happy with it there. In the efficiency state, the Cinebench R2024 power use is going to be somewhere like around 5 to 6 watts of total system power. So kind of like what we do see on GeekBench as well. However, the initial startup of like just generating the scene, you will see a spike up to around 12 watt of total system power. But then it'll slowly start diving down to about 6 watt total system power, which is close to where the GeekBench 6.3 bench does for its general testing as well. So we're pretty much the same there. You can get really good battery life in that same scope. However, when we take a look at the benchmarks, the single core score versus the single core score from efficiency to performance mode really doesn't change much, at least insofar as how Cinebench R2024 looks at it. The multi-score does change drastically, though. We're at 541 points for the multi-core score on the energy efficiency profile versus 1,081 points on the multi-core score on the performance mode. So we're getting double the performance. However, we use 3 times the amount of power to achieve that on the Snapdragon X Elite. When we're running on the multi-core score on the R2024, it's using about 23 watts of total system power. When we go over to performance mode, we're going to be using 64 watts of total system power. So almost 3 times more power to achieve 2 times the performance. Largely that isn't worth it in my book, but if you demand that type of performance, you'll just basically need to be plugged in when you need to get that performance. So just keep that in mind. The one thing that I do want to compare here a little bit is how AMD looks like when we kind of align these. So on the 8840U platform, how can I make the AMD platform use 23 watts of total system power to match the efficiency side of R2024 for the Qualcomm Snapdragon X Elite? And if I just put a cap limit on the CPU cores to 2.7 gigahertz, that gets me pretty much exactly with the monitor off. So the display is off on both the Asus laptop as well as the 8840U laptop that I'm using here. It's a GP2 Win Max 2. So the display is off on both of these. So we are not accounting for the system power, any part of the display attributing to the system power at all. So this is just the RAM, SSD, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, all of the accompanying parts of the motherboard as well as the chip itself and how much power they're using. So when I match total system power from the AMD 8840U, we're actually beating the Snapdragon X Elite. Now, I am running the x86 version of Cinebench R2024, whereas we're running the ARM version of Cinebench R2024 on the Snapdragon X Elite. So both of these are the native compiled versions for those respective platforms. However, I am still winning on AMD's 8840U using the same amount of power. So this is, once again, kind of what I want to kind of point out here is that while the laptop is very, very nice, it's not without reason that we can't also match power and performance on other platforms. There isn't any magic sauce to ARM here. It's just that you kind of have to do a little bit more work on x86 to actually flex that out of it. So that's one thing that I really want to kind of highlight here, just so that you guys have a better understanding that there isn't any real secret sauce. It's just a matter of how you tune things. That could also stand to reason that I don't really know how to tune everything on ARM either. So maybe I can get things better on ARM. Maybe ARM's just going to get better as more people look at it. There's still a lot of unknowns here, but right now with where we're looking at this particular review, it's not a silver bullet to all of your concerns and thinking that ARM is going to be the best performance at low power. It's just not the case insofar as what we're looking at right now. So with the CPU benchmarks out of the way, let's go ahead and go into the gaming benchmarks, which should solidify your understanding that this is not a gaming laptop. While it can game, this is not something that you would really look forward to for gaming purposes. Okay, the first gaming benchmarks that we're going to be taking a look at in this video, we're going to be taking a look at a native ARM application. This is going to be the Dolphin emulator, which is a Gamecube emulator, and it is built for Windows on ARM. So it's a native ARM application that we'll be able to run here. I'm going to be running Super Monkey Ball 2 here. The reason I chose Super Monkey Ball 2 is it's a very lightweight Gamecube game. This is a game that can run on potatoes, and I was hoping that we could really highlight how efficient this chip is, but unfortunately that's just not the case. Now this may be a number of factors. I am running the Vulkan backend, and for what it's worth, that was the best backend that I've used. DirectX 12 wasn't as good, so ultimately I chose the Vulkan backend here. Now perhaps there's just optimizations that need to happen on the Dolphin emulator itself, because there really isn't a whole bunch of Windows on ARM devices out there, so maybe it's just not getting enough love. But if we take a look at it, like we had talked about prior, just before we got into this benchmark section, this will be divided between performance mode and efficiency mode, and generally speaking this is double the power. So if efficiency mode's at 8 watt, our performance mode's at 15 watt. If efficiency mode's at 19 watt, our performance mode is going to be at 38 watt. And I don't know why it lined up like that, but that's just how it is based on what I'm looking at. So we take a look at efficiency mode. If you just take a look at averages, right, on the performance mode we see 59.9 FPS average, and that seems like it's good. But even when we take a look at our 1 percentile FPS at 52.4, you can actually feel stuttering every now and again. And this is present a number of times in a lot of different ways. Even for regular PC gaming, they just kind of crop up periodically now and then. If we take a look at the average FPS for our efficiency mode, we're looking at 56.6 FPS average. Now, if you were just to look at the averages, you'd be like, oh, that's not too bad. But when you take a look at the 1 percentile FPS, this is where things get really, really bad. And the game is practically unplayable with how much skipping and jerking is going on. So this is something that I really wanted to see much better results. And hopefully this is really just about making better optimizations on the Dolphin emulator versus what we're seeing right now. Jumping into the gaming benchmarks, this is PC gaming benchmarks, so we're going to be taking a look at x86 games that were compiled for x86, but they're going to be running through the Microsoft Prism translation layer to get them running on the ARM Snapdragon X Elite. We're going to be taking a look at Cyberpunk 2077. We're running at 720p with the Steam Deck preset. Steam Deck preset is pretty high graphical settings, and we're not using any upscaling. So this is 720p native render resolution, so we're not using any FSR2 to render at a lower resolution and upscale from there. When we take a look at this, again, this is divided between efficiency mode and performance mode. Efficiency mode, we're using around 19 watts of total system power, where performance mode, we're using 38 watts of total system power. And we take a look at the average FPS, there's really not much of a difference here, but largely where you feel how the game is playing is in the 1 percentile. So if we take a look at the performance mode is at 20.3 FPS on our 1 percentile, and the efficiency mode is 15 FPS for our 1 percentile. And really both of these are very, very poor, especially with a few-year-old generation handhelds at this point. So these are really lackluster results, but when we compare them to other platforms, which I'm going to introduce right now, first we're going to introduce the Intel Meteor Lake platform. These are results from the MSI Claw, so I'll bring those in right now. Okay, so here are the results for the Intel 155H Meteor Lake chip that I was using. And at 15 watt, you can see that the Snapdragon is actually beating it in the efficiency mode by a great deal on average FPS, 1 percentile, 0.2 percentile. It's beating it across the board, which is very impressive. But then again, Intel's Meteor Lake, especially on the MSI Claw, was absolute garbage. And even at 25 watt, we're only beating it on the FPS average. So effectively, FPS average-wise, they're both 30 FPS average. But on the 1 percentile on the MSI Claw Meteor Lake chip, 155H, we're getting 9.5 1 percentile, which is truly terrible. So comparing Cyberpunk 2077, which is a bad game to run on Meteor Lake in general, to Snapdragon is impressive from this particular angle. However, if we bring in AMD on here, okay, so looking at AMD's 8840U platform, I'm dividing this in two different things, effectively efficiency mode and performance mode. So in the 10 watt TDP slice, we're going to be getting somewhere close to 19 watt total system power, maybe a little bit under, but generally speaking, it's going to be pretty close to the same. If we take a look at the FPS average, we're still pretty close, but we're actually doing better on our 1 percentile. So AMD at AMD's 8840U is still technically better than the efficiency mode of the Snapdragon. It does win in average FPS, but our 1 percentile and 0.2 percentile are far better, and the actual feeling of the game is going to be better. Not that this is actually playable, neither of these are, but we're still, in my opinion, getting a far better result on AMD's at 10 watt, which is slightly better on total system power as well. However, when we take a look at the performance mode, 25 watt TDP on 8840U is going to be closer to 40 watt, 38 watt total system power, so we're very much close to that. But in that same scope of how much power is actually being used, AMD's 8840U is just demolishing the Snapdragon X Elite. We have 77% better on FPS averages and 2 times better on our 1 percentile. Inside of this scope, this is actually completely playable and something that you would actually do, whereas you wouldn't play it on any of the other machines. So that's the first part that we're going to be taking a look at. Let's go ahead and take a look at another game. Okay, so the next game we're going to be taking a look at here is Horizon Zero Dawn. We're running 720p and the favorite performance preset. When we take a look at the efficiency mode, the amount of power that we're using in the efficiency mode in this particular game is 23 watts generally on average. For the performance mode, we're using around 38 watts on average for total system power. Now, when we take a look at the averages, we're looking at 36.5 FPS average on the efficiency mode versus 49.7 on averages on the performance mode. So we're getting about 36% better performance on FPS average. However, our 1 percentile is where the big difference is here, and this is where, you know, the performance mode is actually necessary so that it's actually playable. So you need to kind of use 38 watts of total system power just to be able to effectively play this game at 720p with favorite performance settings. We're going to go ahead and take a look at what this looks like with some other platforms. All right, what we're looking at here are the MSI Claws 155H results, both in 20 watt TDP and 25 watt TDP. At 20 watt TDP, the total system power is going to actually be close to the 23 watt total system power. And when we take a look at the difference there, it's 30% different on averages. However, our 1 percentile is better on the MSI Claw by about 25%. So the 1 percentile is better on the MSI Claw inside the same total system power scope. When we bump it up to 25 watt TDP on the MSI Claw, this is going to get us to about 28, 29 watt total on the MSI Claw. We don't get to the averages that are happening on the performance mode. However, we're very close to the 1 percentile FPS. So we're still kind of better in a better situation on the MSI Claw versus the Snapdragon X Elite here in general, just because we're going to be using around 30 watts here to effectively get 30 FPS on our 1 percentile, where we're generally doing that the same. So kind of like these are in the same ballpark, although Horizon Zero Dawn just on averages is going to win, but averages aren't a good metric of what you should be looking at for games. They're just a number. 1 percentile really helps with regards to how it feels, but averages do play a part. Let's go ahead and see what AMD looks like in this scope. Okay, so this is pretty hilarious. So this is AMD's 8840U, specifically GB2 Max 2, at 15 watt TDP, which is going to be closer to the efficiency power number. So we're going to get around 24 watt total system power. So 15 watt would equal what the efficiency is here. And AMD's 8840U is about 2.2 times better than the efficiency mode of the Snapdragon X Elite, which is basically going to be using the same amount of power. So the 8840U is just demolishing that. And then when we take a look at the 38 watt, you know, even the 20 watt, I can bring in the 25 watt if we're doing 38 watt total system power. So this is the 25 watt TDP slice for AMD's 8840U right here, and this is going to get us closer to this 38 watt total system power. So again, we're almost at like a 2 times on FPS average on the 8840U, using pretty much exactly the same amount of power. And if we look at the 1 percentile, also a two times increase on the 8840U. So AMD's 8840U specifically for Horizon Zero Dawn is just really good on AMD stuff. And 8840U is blowing the Snapdragon X Elite out of the water with regard to how much power is being used. And really, we're just really deficient on the GPU side of the Snapdragon X Elite. That'll be more apparent in a moment when we bring up Doom Eternal, but I'll do another comparison first. So let's go ahead and jump into that one. And the next game we're going to be taking a look at here is the Callisto Protocol. We're running 720p. We are upscaling with TAA, so TAA is the upscaling method that we're using, and the preset is low settings. Afterwards, this should show us custom settings once we enable TAA as the upscaling method, but those are the settings that I'm using. In our efficiency mode, we're using 24 watts of total system power on average. For our performance mode, we're using 34 watts of total system power on average. And when we take a look here, our averages are 26.2 FPS average on the efficiency and 29.2 average on our performance. And our 1 percentile is really bad as well. We're 7.8 frames on our 1 percentile and 9.1 frames on our 1 percentile for the performance. This is not a good experience at all. It does feel super clunky when just moving around, and it doesn't even look all that good. So this is one thing that is pretty much stressing the Snapdragon Elite a lot. Okay, when we bring in the GPU Mini at 15 watt TDP, 15 watt TDP is going to be close to the efficiency mode here of the 24 watt total system power here. So again, on the GPU Mini 15 watt TDP slice, we'd be using 24 watts of total system power. So this is where things are much more comparable in terms of how much actual power is being used. And once again, AMD's 8840U is just crushing the Snapdragon X Elite. Averages are almost 2x on averages. 1 percentile is almost 3 times better. So this is, 20 watt TDP is really necessary on the 8840U. You can see that 1 percentile being super low, even at 20 watt. We have 60 FPS averages, but that 1 percentile is really going to be really making the feeling of the game apparent. So 20 watt, 15 watt may be okay, but 20 watt on the 8840U is something that I would very much recommend, and just to have a kind of a good feeling for the game. Otherwise, Snapdragon X Elite isn't here, and once again reaffirms that the Snapdragon X Elite currently, especially the chipset that is on the Asus laptop that I have, is not really a gaming laptop. Okay, the next game that we're going to be taking a look at is Shadow of the Tomb Raider. We're running 720p here. TAA is enabled, and I'm using the low settings preset. Not the lowest, but the low settings preset. When we take a look at our efficiency mode, we're using 20 watts of total system power typically on average, and we're getting 44.5 FPS average and 30.8 on our 1 percentile. Honestly, this is quite playable here, so this is a pretty good showing at 20 watt total system power insofar as what's going on, right? We're doing, there's a translation layer here for ARM to run this game, so this is still a pretty good result. And we go into the performance mode, we're increasing power considerably, going to up to 35 watt total system power. We're only gaining about 10% FPS on average, and also 10% on our 1 percentile. Nothing really that large, so going to performance mode is really just a giant waste of power. It wouldn't really be recommended. Let's take a look at what some other platforms look like. Okay, this is the 8840U. We're taking a look at the GPU Mini here, but it's still AMD's 8840U at 10 watt TDP. Effectively, our total system power is going to be somewhat close to this 20 watt number. It's going to be a little bit under that, but it's going to be what we can close like as an approximate value in terms of total system power in comparison. So when we take a look at this, we're still getting better on AMD's 8840U, also slightly better total system power. And our 1 percentile is 25% better on the AMD 8840U, even within the same power scope, total system power wise. So when we're looking at this, AMD is still a better option from the gaming angle, which is something that, obviously is coming up a lot here. And if we go into the performance mode, we're using 35 watts of total system power. What I have here is 20 watt for the GPU Mini, and this is going to be closer to like 30 watt, maybe 31 watt total system power. And here we see a pretty large difference. So we're looking at 88%, 89% difference on averages, over 2 times on 1 percentile. So it's just a ginormous difference between these two at these same settings. Okay, and the last game that we're going to be looking at is Doom Eternal. This is 720p low settings with no upscaling enabled. And truthfully, this is probably the most atrocious result that we have here. One interesting bit here is that the efficiency mode, we're capping out at around 17 watt total system power. This is on average. And on the performance mode, we're way below all the other types of games that we've been playing. This is 25 watts of total system power that we're averaging on the performance mode, and typically 25 watts was getting closer to the efficiency side on those other games. So when you actually take a look at the game being played of Doom Eternal on the Snapdragon X Elite, what you're going to be noticing is that, especially with the metrics up on screen, you should see that we are hard pegged on how much we're in demand for GPU. We are so GPU bound. it's not even funny. And when we're taking a look at this test, you can see this is really, really poor. Insofar as there are so many handhelds that run Doom Eternal so much better than this. And when we think about 17 watts of total system power, even 25 watts of total system power, the Steam Deck would get closer to 70 and 80 FPS in this exact same setting. So the Steam Deck will trounce this really hard. It'll actually even go up to ultra settings and get somewhere close to like 60 FPS. So the Steam Deck is so much far beyond better than what the Snapdragon X Elite is in this, and it really highlights how deficient we are on the GPU part insofar as what's available on this Asus laptop. So hopefully that highlights it for you and kind of culminates that this shouldn't be looked at as a gaming laptop at all. It can do some gaming, but you really shouldn't. And even though it can, as like a fun experiment, if you were interested, you should be looking at other laptops. With those benchmarks out of the way, I do want to mention that there are still a lot of things that you can do. DirectX 9 games work on this just fine. DirectX 11 games work on this just fine. So if you wanted to play older PC games, I played a bunch. Everyone that I played seemed to work just fine. There are games that do not work, and those are the games like anything that has easy anti-cheat. If easy anti-cheat is required to run the game, it'll say, hey, I detect an ARM CPU, and it won't run. So Elden Ring won't run. A lot of games that you would want to play that have easy anti-cheat likely won't run. So again, another nail in the coffin for this not really being a gaming laptop, something that you would want to game on. Again, you'd be looking at x86-based laptops for that particular purpose. We also have to talk about AutoSR from Windows. This is automatic super resolution. This is an upscaling method that Windows is introducing. This is going to be in 24H2, so a lot of other laptops should have this, and it should be working off the NPU. Right now, this is targeting the Snapdragon X Elite, and it's kind of unique for this platform right now. Right now, there isn't really much to write home about that. AutoSR, especially the games that should have compatibility, aren't very good. So like games like Resident Evil 2, Resident Evil 3, Borderlands 3, all three of these games, when you run them with AutoSR on, it's recognized that that is running. However, the only available resolutions that I have are not very realistic for me to be actually using AutoSR. Now, it could be that I just don't know how to use AutoSR right now. And for what it's worth, there's only a few games that have compatibility with AutoSR. For the three that I tried, like I showed, it wasn't really working how I thought it would. For God of War, it does work, but it didn't show any real performance improvement. I did see some weird fringing around some edges and stuff, which is like a telltale sign of what you can actually see. You could also force enable AutoSR on other games. So in this particular example, you can see that I'm force enabling AutoSR in Cyberpunk here. And when we compare just on the menu alone, you can see the fringing that's happening when it's doing some weird upscaling on the lettering themselves. And it kind of has some weird artifacting with regard to what's going on there. So again, while that I can see that it's doing something, I saw no performance improvement whatsoever and the same amount of total system power. So at the moment, I'm not finding any silver bullet where this is worthwhile. Maybe it's just the current implementation and this still needs to get worked on. But as it stands right now, the AutoSR implementation that I've been using, I've just been having off the entire time, especially when through all my testing, it's just been off. I never really found much use for it at the current moment. But again, maybe I'm just using it wrong. So that may just be a me problem. So ultimately, that gets me to the question of why would you even want this laptop? Can I recommend this laptop? And it comes down to a few things. Ultimately, I have a hard time recommending this laptop. It has a fantastic OLED panel. For all intents and purposes, I don't think many people are going to have any particular issue running any of the applications that they're using all the time. Everything that I tried running, I would have a hard time understanding. If someone told me that it was running ARM, I probably wouldn't have noticed immediately if I was just trying to use it and run applications. There was nothing that stood out to me that something was obviously wrong. This is, for all intents and purposes, a Windows laptop for most everyone. You're going to get really good battery life, and the power sleep state is using modern standby insofar as what Power CFG is telling me. It does an excellent job with modern standby. However, I still have an internal conflict with how I could try to rationalize and recommend this, only because I have the mindset that I can tune another laptop to match the power and performance of what's going on here. So really this comes down to, are you going to play games? Yes, no. If no, then yes, this is a good laptop, but also only keep it in energy efficiency mode because going into best performance mode on battery makes it similar to other laptops where you're not going to see those battery efficiency gains or have those battery hopes like you would from an M1 Mac. That's pretty much where I would stand with this. So go with that at the moment. It is an awesome laptop with those caveats, so just keep that in mind. Thank you very much to my Patreon members as well as my YouTube channel members. Your support means the world to me, guys. I hope this video was informative. As always, guys, thank you for your time, and thanks for watching.